The worst mistake a powerful man can make is believing the woman who holds his world together will never leave. The rooftop ballroom of the Blackstone Grand shimmered above Manhattan like a world untouched by ordinary problems. Crystal chandeliers reflected against floor-to-ceiling glass, jazz music floated softly through the air, and the city lights below looked like stars scattered across the Hudson River. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed over million-dollar deals while women in designer gowns moved gracefully between silver trays of champagne. Everything about the night screamed power, money, perfection. And standing quietly near the back of the room, Claire Bennett adjusted the sleeve of her black dress and checked Adrian Cole's schedule for the third time in 10 minutes. "Your investor from Seattle just arrived," she said calmly, stepping beside him. Adrian barely looked up from his phone. "Move the Mercer meeting to Monday." "You already moved it twice." "Then move something else." His voice was clipped, controlled, cold in the way only very powerful men could be. Claire nodded anyway. "Of course." She turned smoothly, already solving problems in her head before they could become disasters. That was what she always did. For 4 years, Claire had memorized every rhythm of Adrian Cole's life. She knew he drank black coffee after stressful board meetings but added 1 sugar when he hadn't slept. She knew migraines hit behind his left eye whenever quarterly reports came in weak. She knew exactly how long he needed silence after difficult investor calls and precisely which time meant he was nervous, even though nobody else in America would ever believe Adrian Cole got nervous about anything. She knew him better than anyone. The dangerous part was, somewhere along the way, she had started loving him too. "Adrian." A silver-haired investor approached with an amused smile, bourbon glass in hand. "You hiding your beautiful assistant from us tonight?" Adrian finally glanced up. "Claire handles my calendar. That's about it." The men laughed lightly. Claire forced a polite smile, though something small tightened painfully in her chest. She had heard versions of this before. Assistant. Employee. Efficient. Replaceable. Never Claire. Never the woman who stayed awake rewriting his speeches at 2 in the morning while he barked revisions over speakerphone. Never the woman who sat outside hospital rooms alone after his panic-induced migraines because he refused to let the press see weakness. Never the woman who quietly kept his entire life from collapsing. "Come on," another man teased. "A woman looks at a man like that for only 2 reasons." Adrian took a slow sip of whiskey, completely unbothered. "Claire is replaceable." The words landed harder than a slap. For 1 second, the entire ballroom seemed to go silent around her. Claire's smile froze. Adrian didn't notice. Of course he didn't. He was already turning toward another billionaire, another conversation, another deal worth more than most people's homes. Claire swallowed carefully, and stepped away before anyone could see the sudden shine gathering in her eyes. She moved past the glowing ballroom doors and onto the quieter rooftop terrace where cold October wind brushed against her bare shoulders. Manhattan stretched endlessly before her, beautiful and distant and lonely. She pressed one trembling hand against the railing and took a slow breath. "You know," a warm male voice said behind her, "any man stupid enough to call a woman like you replaceable probably doesn't deserve her." Claire turned quickly. A tall man stood near the terrace entrance, dark navy suit, rain-gray eyes, calm smile. He held out his jacket without hesitation. "You looked cold." She blinked in surprise. "I'm okay." "No," he said gently. "You just pretend to be." For the first time all night, someone was actually looking at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. Down inside the ballroom, Adrian Cole laughed at something another investor said. But when he glanced toward the terrace a moment later and saw another man placing his jacket over Claire Bennett's shoulders, the smile disappeared from his face almost instantly. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, something sharp and unfamiliar twisted painfully in his chest. The next morning, rain streaked softly against the glass walls of Cole and Vale Capital while Manhattan moved in gray waves beneath the 48th floor. Inside the executive office, everything looked exactly the same as always. The espresso machine hummed quietly. Financial reports sat perfectly stacked beside Adrian Cole's laptop. His 8:30 conference call waited on screen. Nothing had changed. Except Claire Bennett was 6 minutes late. Adrian glanced toward the office entrance again, irritation tightening his jaw. Claire was never late. Not once in 4 years. At exactly 8:37, she finally walked in carrying her tablet and a cardboard tray with 2 coffees. "Good morning," she said evenly. No smile. No warmth. Just professional. Adrian looked up from his desk. "You are late." Claire placed his coffee beside him without meeting his eyes. "Traffic near Lexington. You should have left earlier." "Probably." Her tone stayed calm, but something about it felt different. Distant. Adrian frowned slightly. Usually Claire would already be listing schedule updates, investor notes, reminders about medication, or warnings about which board members plan to challenge him today. Instead, she simply opened her laptop and sat down at the assistant desk outside his office. Quiet. Adrian picked up the coffee automatically and paused after one sip. No sugar. For years Claire had remembered every detail of his routine without being asked. Especially after late events. Especially after whiskey. He looked through the glass wall toward her desk. Claire was focused on typing emails, expression unreadable. For some reason, the missing teaspoon of sugar bothered him far more than it should have. "Claire." She looked up immediately. "Yes?" "You forgot the sugar." "I did." Adrian waited for her to explain. She did not. The silence stretched awkwardly between them before Claire returned to her screen. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest again. Annoyance. No. Something stranger. By noon, the entire office could feel the shift. Claire no longer hovered near Adrian anticipating every problem before it appeared. She no longer corrected his forgotten appointments mid-conversation. She no longer walked into meetings carrying extra headache medicine in her purse because she knew stress triggered migraines behind his left eye. She simply did her job. Exactly her job. Nothing more. Adrian hated it instantly. Around 1:15, his office doors opened again. "Mr. Mercer is here for the redevelopment proposal." Claire's voice remained polite and cool. Adrian looked up sharply as Julian Mercer stepped inside with an easy smile and rain droplets still clinging to the shoulders of his charcoal coat. "Adrian," Julian greeted warmly, extending his hand. "Good to see you again." Adrian shook it firmly. "You too." But Julian's attention shifted almost immediately toward Claire. "And Claire Bennett," he said with genuine recognition. "I was hoping you would be here." Claire blinked, slightly surprised. "You remember me?" "Most people do not rescue strangers from awkward charity galas with grace." Julian smiled softly. "Hard thing to forget." Adrian's expression darkened almost imperceptibly. Claire gave a small polite laugh, the first real laugh Adrian had heard from her all day. Somehow that irritated him even more. During the meeting, Adrian noticed things he should not have been noticing. The way Julian listened carefully every time Claire spoke. The way Claire relaxed slightly around him. The way Julian held eye contact instead of dismissing her like background furniture in the room. At one point, Claire leaned across the conference table to explain zoning permits, and Julian said quietly, "You are probably the smartest person in this building." Claire smiled down at her notes, almost shy. Adrian closed his folder harder than necessary. The sharp sound echoed through the room. Both of them looked toward him. "Problem?" Julian asked calmly. Adrian forced a tight smile. "No problem. But there was one." For the first time in years, Adrian Cole was beginning to realize what the office felt like when Claire Bennett stopped giving him the best parts of herself. And the worst part was watching another man notice exactly what he had taken for granted. By Friday evening, the tension inside Cole and Vale Capital had become impossible to ignore. Employees lowered their voices whenever Adrian Cole walked past glass offices, and even senior executives exchanged cautious looks whenever Claire Bennett entered a room. Nobody understood exactly what had changed between them. They only knew the atmosphere felt colder now. Sharper. Like something fragile had cracked beneath the surface. Claire stood near the copy room reviewing contracts while soft rain tapped against the windows outside. Her cream-colored sweater hung loosely beneath a tailored gray coat, and for the first time in years, she was actually preparing to leave work before 7 o'clock. Her laptop bag rested beside her desk. Her inbox was clean. Her calendar updates were finished. No waiting around in case Adrian suddenly needed her at midnight. No canceling personal plans because another billionaire changed his mind over dinner. She was done bending her life around a man who barely noticed she existed. Leaving early? Madison from accounting asked carefully as she passed by. Claire offered a small smile. Trying something new. The office feels weird without you staying until midnight. Claire glanced toward Adrian's closed office doors across the floor. I think everyone will survive. But even she knew that was not true. Inside his office, Adrian sat alone staring at a financial report he had already reread 3 times. The numbers blurred together uselessly. His attention kept drifting toward the empty space outside his glass walls where Claire normally worked long after everyone else left. He could still hear her laugh from earlier that afternoon when Julian Mercer had stopped by unexpectedly carrying coffee from the little cafe downstairs. Adrian hated the fact he remembered every detail. No cinnamon this time. Julian had teased lightly while handing Claire the cup. I remembered. Claire had smiled in genuine surprise. You remembered that? Some things are worth remembering. Adrian had nearly snapped his pen in half. Now, at 6:43, he looked up again and noticed Claire slipping her coat over her shoulders. Leaving. His jaw tightened immediately. He pressed the intercom button. Claire. My office. A pause. Right now. Seconds later she stepped inside carrying her tablet. Professional. Calm. Distant. Adrian leaned back in his chair. Where are you going? Claire blinked once. Home. You still have tomorrow's investor packets unfinished. They were completed an hour ago. Adrian opened the folder beside him automatically and froze when he realized she was right. Every document had already been prepared perfectly. Color-coded tabs. Notes attached. Backup copies included. Of course she had finished them. Claire always finished everything. I also scheduled your migraine appointment for Tuesday, she added evenly. And moved your Boston call because the weather forecast predicts delays. Adrian stared at her for a moment. How did you know about the weather? Because someone has to pay attention. The words hit harder than she intended. Silence filled the office. Through the glass walls, New York glowed in blurred gold lights beneath the rain. Adrian watched Claire carefully. For years she had looked at him with warmth she tried desperately to hide. Tonight there was only exhaustion. You have been different all week, he said finally. Claire gave a faint humorless smile. I think I finally stopped confusing loyalty with invisibility. Adrian frowned. What is that supposed to mean? She looked directly at him then. Not intimidated. Not emotional. Just honest. You said I was replaceable, Adrian. Hearing his own words repeated back to him felt unexpectedly ugly. You heard that. The entire rooftop probably heard it. Adrian stood slowly from behind his desk. Claire, you know I did not mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? He opened his mouth and realized he had no answer. Because the truth was worse. He had said it automatically. Carelessly. The way powerful men spoke when they assumed certain people would stay no matter how badly they were treated. Claire picked up her bag quietly. Good night, Adrian. She turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her again. Are you seeing him? Claire glanced back. Julian? Adrian hated hearing the other man's name from her lips. Yes. She studied him for one long second before answering softly. Why does that bother you? Adrian did not respond quickly enough. And somehow, that silence answered everything. Saturday arrived wrapped in pale autumn sunlight and cold Manhattan wind, but Adrian Cole barely noticed either one. He stood alone in the penthouse kitchen staring down at a cup of coffee that tasted wrong again. Too bitter. Too cold. Too empty. He opened the cabinet, automatically searching for sugar packets before stopping halfway through the motion. Claire usually restocked them every Friday evening because she knew he always forgot. The realization irritated him more than it should have. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath. He was a billionaire CEO, not some helpless man incapable of organizing his own kitchen. And yet the silence inside the penthouse felt unbearable without the invisible ways Claire had quietly shaped his life around him. Around 10:30 that morning, Adrian arrived at the office for a private strategy meeting only to find Claire already there inside the conference room beside Julian Mercer. Sunlight spilled across the polished oak table while architectural blueprints covered every surface between them. Claire looked different today. Relaxed. Her hair fell loosely over one shoulder instead of pinned into its usual perfect style, and she was smiling again. Really smiling. Adrian had almost forgotten what that looked like. "You came in on a Saturday?" Adrian asked sharply the second he entered. Claire looked up calmly. "Julian needed revisions finalized before Monday." Julian leaned back in his chair. "Claire saved the entire waterfront proposal in about 40 minutes. It was already mostly done," Claire said modestly. "Still impressive." Julian's voice carried that same warm admiration Adrian was beginning to hate. Adrian tossed his coat over a chair harder than necessary. "The finance numbers are wrong on page 14. Claire blinked. "No, they are not." Adrian slid the report toward her. "Projected material costs." Claire reviewed the page briefly before meeting his eyes again. "Those are updated numbers from yesterday's supplier adjustment." Adrian checked the report himself, and realized immediately she was right. Again. A heavy silence settled across the room. Julian watched the interaction carefully but wisely said nothing. Adrian hated that too. For the next hour, Adrian tried focusing on business, but every small detail kept pulling his attention back toward Claire and Julian together. The quiet laughter between them. The way Julian instinctively pulled out a chair for her during lunch. The way Claire no longer looked exhausted all the time around him. At one point, Julian showed her something on his tablet, and Claire laughed softly, leaning closer to see the screen. Adrian's chest tightened instantly. "We should move on," he interrupted coldly. Both of them looked up. Claire straightened slightly. "Right." Julian studied Adrian for one unreadable second before calmly closing the tablet. "Actually, Claire and I were discussing the Rome expansion project." Adrian's expression hardened. "What about it?" "I asked her to come oversee operations for a few months." The room went still. Claire looked surprised Julian had mentioned it aloud. Adrian stared directly at him. "Excuse me?" Julian remained perfectly calm. "She is one of the most capable project coordinators I have ever worked with. Rome could be good for her." Adrian turned immediately toward Claire. "You are considering leaving New York?" Claire hesitated only briefly. "I have not decided yet." Something sharp moved through Adrian so quickly it almost felt like panic. "Your position is here." Claire's eyes lifted toward him steadily. "My position is wherever I choose to be." Silence crashed heavily between them. Julian quietly gathered a few documents, clearly sensing the shift in the room. "I am going downstairs for coffee," he said smoothly. "Either of you want anything?" "No," Adrian answered instantly. Claire gave a polite shake of her head. The moment Julian disappeared through the conference doors, Adrian stood from his chair. "You are seriously thinking about leaving with him?" Claire slowly closed her folder. "You do not get to sound angry about that." "I am not angry." "Then what are you?" Adrian opened his mouth and stopped. Because for the first time in years, he genuinely did not know how to explain what was happening inside him. Claire watched him carefully, almost sadly now. "You only notice me when someone else does." The truth in her voice landed brutally hard. Adrian stepped closer instinctively. "That is not true." Claire gave a faint, heartbreaking smile. "Then tell me one thing, Adrian." Her eyes held his completely now. If Julian never walked into that ballroom, would you have ever realized I was disappearing at all? And once again, Adrian Cole had absolutely no answer. Monday night arrived wrapped in silver rain and camera flashes as New York's elite gathered inside the Harrington Foundation ballroom for the annual charity auction. Crystal glasses clinked beneath golden chandeliers while a string quartet played softly near the marble staircase. Reporters floated between billionaires and celebrities searching for the perfect photograph, the perfect scandal, the perfect moment. Adrian Cole stood near the center of it all, looking perfectly composed in a black tuxedo, one hand resting inside his pocket, while investors competed for his attention. On the outside, he looked untouchable as always. Inside, he had spent the entire weekend thinking about Claire Bennett. Every room without her had felt strangely hollow. Every silence louder. And worst of all, every thought somehow led back to Julian Mercer. "Smile, Adrian," one board member joked quietly. "You look like someone stole your company." Adrian forced a tight smile that never reached his eyes. Across the ballroom, Claire entered beside Julian, and the entire room seemed to shift around her instantly. Adrian noticed her before anyone else did. Of course he did. Claire wore a dark emerald dress that caught the chandelier light with every movement, elegant without trying too hard. Her hair rested softly against bare shoulders, and for the first time in years, she did not look exhausted walking into one of Adrian's events. She looked alive. Julian leaned down slightly to say something near her ear, and Claire laughed quietly. Adrian's jaw tightened immediately. "There she is," one investor murmured nearby. "Your assistant cleans up nicely." Adrian did not answer this time. He simply watched as Claire moved through the ballroom with Julian beside her. People noticed her tonight. Really noticed her. Not as the silent woman carrying schedules behind a billionaire, but as someone radiant on her own. Adrian hated how much that realization burned. "You should go say hello," Madison whispered carefully after approaching his side. Adrian's eyes stayed fixed across the room. "I am busy." "No," she said gently. "You are jealous." Adrian turned sharply toward her. Madison raised both hands immediately. "Hey, I am just saying what literally everyone else in this building can see." Before Adrian could respond, applause suddenly rose near the auction stage. Julian had stepped onto the platform holding a microphone, while Claire stood beside him looking startled. "Good evening, everyone," Julian said smoothly. "Before the bidding starts tonight, I would like to recognize someone extraordinary." Adrian's stomach tightened instantly. Claire looked confused beside him. Julian smiled warmly toward the crowd. "Most people in this city celebrate power. But very few celebrate the people quietly holding everything together behind the scenes." Several guests glanced curiously toward Claire now. "Over the last few weeks," Julian continued, "I have had the privilege of working with Claire Bennett. And honestly, I do not think Cole and Vale Capital realizes how lucky they are to have her." Soft laughter moved through the ballroom. Adrian remained completely still. Julian looked toward Claire then, his voice gentler now. "You deserve to be seen, Claire." The room broke into applause. Real applause. Claire's eyes widened slightly in surprise as dozens of people around the ballroom smiled toward her. Adrian felt something twist painfully in his chest watching it happen. Because Julian was giving Claire something Adrian never had. Recognition. Value. Warmth. Humanity. Claire stepped toward the microphone carefully. "Thank you," she said softly, clearly overwhelmed. "That was unexpected." "The best things usually are," Julian answered with a smile. Their eyes held for one brief second too long. Adrian looked away first. Half an hour later, he found Claire alone near the balcony overlooking Central Park while rain shimmered softly against the glass outside. "Enjoying the attention?" Adrian asked coldly as he approached. Claire turned toward him slowly. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Julian seems determined to put you on display tonight." Hurt flickered briefly across her face before disappearing. "You really do not hear yourself, do you?" Adrian stepped closer. "I know exactly what I hear." "No," Claire said quietly. You hear ownership whenever another man treats me kindly. The words landed brutally hard because they were true. Adrian exhaled sharply. You are acting different. Claire stared at him in disbelief. Because someone finally reminded me I matter? Adrian's expression hardened instinctively. Do not do this. Do what? She asked softly. Pretend I am human instead of convenient? Silence stretched heavily between them while music echoed faintly from the ballroom behind the glass doors. Adrian looked at her, then really looked at her, and suddenly understood something terrifying. Claire Bennett was slowly building a life that no longer revolved around him. And for the first time in years, Adrian Cole had no idea how to stop it. The following Thursday, the first snow of the season drifted softly across Manhattan as Cole and Vail Capital hosted its annual winter board dinner inside the Crown Meridian Hotel. The ballroom glowed with candlelight and gold silk centerpieces while executives moved between tables discussing expansion deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Outside the tall glass windows, New York shimmered beneath white snow and silver streetlights. Inside, Adrian Cole sat at the head table feeling like he could not breathe properly. Claire Bennett was seated 3 chairs away beside Julian Mercer. And somehow that mattered more than the $12 billion merger discussion happening around him. Adrian barely heard half the conversation all evening. He only noticed Claire. The way she smiled more easily lately. The way she no longer looked toward him every few minutes waiting for silent instructions. The way Julian listened whenever she spoke, like her thoughts genuinely mattered. Adrian hated every second of it. You are unusually quiet tonight, one investor joked. Adrian took a sip of bourbon. I am listening. But he was not. Because Claire was laughing softly beside Julian again, and every sound of it scraped painfully against his nerves. At one point during dinner, Claire excused herself briefly to take a phone call near the ballroom entrance. Adrian's eyes followed her automatically. Julian noticed. Of course he noticed. You should probably talk to her honestly, Julian said calmly once Claire stepped away. Adrian's gaze snapped toward him instantly. Excuse me? Julian folded his napkin carefully beside his plate. You look at her like a man watching someone walk away. Adrian's jaw tightened. You are overstepping. Maybe. Julian remained irritatingly calm. But I think Claire spent years loving someone who only valued her when another man started paying attention. The words hit with surgical precision. Adrian's voice turned colder. You do not know anything about us. Julian held his stare evenly. No. But I know what invisible women look like. Silence fell heavily between them. Around the ballroom, conversations continued beneath soft piano music and clinking wine glasses, completely unaware of the tension building at the head table. Adrian leaned slightly closer. What exactly are you trying to do here? Julian answered without hesitation. Treat her like she matters. Something dangerous flashed across Adrian's expression then. Not anger exactly. Something more raw. More personal. Before he could respond, Claire returned to the table unaware of the conversation she had interrupted. Everything okay? She asked quietly. Perfect, Julian answered smoothly. Adrian said nothing. For the next 20 minutes, the tension only grew worse. Adrian interrupted Claire twice during presentations. He corrected details she had already explained perfectly. At one point, he completely dismissed one of her suggestions in front of the board despite approving the exact same idea days earlier. Claire finally looked at him in disbelief. You already signed off on that proposal Monday. Adrian's voice stayed sharp. I changed my mind. The room fell awkwardly quiet. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Julian slowly set down his wine glass. With all due respect, he said evenly, that proposal was excellent. Adrian turned toward him immediately. Nobody asked you. Claire stared at Adrian now, hurt flickering openly across her face for the first time in weeks. What is wrong with you tonight? She asked softly. Adrian stood from his chair abruptly. Nothing is wrong. Then stop treating me like I am the enemy. Her voice was quiet, but the disappointment inside it somehow sounded louder than shouting. Adrian exhaled sharply. You are making emotional decisions. Claire blinked slowly like she could not believe what she was hearing. Emotional? Julian's expression hardened slightly now. No, he said calmly. She is finally making healthy ones. Adrian looked at him with open hostility. Stay out of this. Why? Julian asked quietly. Because you are afraid he sees me more clearly than you ever did? Claire's voice trembled slightly now, not with weakness but exhaustion. The ballroom had grown noticeably silent around them. Several board members pretended not to watch while absolutely watching everything. Adrian stepped closer instinctively. Claire. But she shook her head softly before he could continue. Do you know what hurts the most? Her eyes locked onto his completely. Not that you said I was replaceable. Adrian felt his chest tighten painfully. Claire swallowed hard. It is that part of me believed you. The words shattered something inside him instantly. Claire turned away before he could answer and walked quickly toward the ballroom exit. Adrian moved after her automatically, but Julian stood slowly from his chair first and looked him directly in the eye. If you care about her at all, he said quietly, stop making her prove she deserves kindness. And for the first time in years, Adrian Cole stood completely speechless while the woman he could no longer pretend not to love walked away from him. The office was quieter than usual Monday morning. Snow drifted lazily beyond the glass walls of Cole and Vale Capital while Manhattan moved beneath a pale gray sky, but inside the executive floor, something felt wrong almost immediately. Adrian Cole stepped out of the elevator at exactly 7:45 expecting to hear Claire Bennett already typing at her desk like she always did before sunrise meetings. Instead, silence greeted him. Her desk lamp was off. Her coffee mug was gone. And for the first time in 4 years, her chair sat completely empty. Adrian slowed his steps without realizing it. Where is Claire? He asked sharply the second Madison walked past carrying folders. Madison hesitated. She called in this morning. Adrian frowned instantly. She never calls in. Well, Madison said carefully. After what happened Thursday night. Adrian's jaw tightened. Did she say when she is coming back? Madison looked away for half a second too long. No. Something cold settled heavily in Adrian's chest. He walked straight into his office trying to ignore the strange panic creeping beneath his ribs. His desk already felt wrong without Claire's quiet presence outside the glass walls. No neatly organized schedule waiting beside his laptop. No fresh coffee placed silently beside financial reports. No sticky note reminding him about his 9 o'clock call with Tokyo investors because she knew he would forget after sleeping 3 hours. The silence was unbearable. Adrian sat down hard in his chair and reached for his calendar automatically before freezing. Claire had already color-coded the entire month in advance. Meetings. Flights. Investor dinners. Medication reminders. Even backup transportation plans in case snow delayed traffic downtown. Every detail of his life had been quietly managed by someone he spent years pretending did not matter enough. His chest tightened painfully. Around noon, Adrian finally stepped outside his office and stopped near Claire's empty desk again. Something about it felt haunting now. The little framed photo of her parents was gone. The navy cardigan she always kept draped over her chair during cold mornings was missing too. Adrian looked down slowly and noticed a white envelope resting perfectly centered on the desk. His name written across the front in Claire's handwriting. His stomach dropped instantly. Adrian picked it up with suddenly unsteady hands. Inside was a resignation letter. Short. Professional. Polite. Effective immediately. Adrian stared at the page for several long seconds while noise from the office faded into nothing around him. No, he whispered under his breath. Madison approached quietly from behind. She came in early this morning before anyone arrived, she admitted softly. Packed everything up and left. Adrian looked up sharply. Where did she go? I do not know. Did she say anything? Madison hesitated again. Only that she was tired of being invisible. The words hit harder than anything else had. Adrian walked back into his office slowly, like the floor beneath him no longer felt stable. For years, Claire had been everywhere inside his life. Quietly fixing problems before he even noticed them. Protecting him from stress he never saw. Remembering details nobody else cared enough to remember. And now suddenly she was gone. Really gone. Adrian sat heavily at his desk and noticed another small stack waiting beside his laptop. Sticky notes. Hundreds of them. Tiny reminders Claire had apparently left behind over time. Do not skip lunch before investor calls. Take migraine medication before the flight. You always hate this tie after long meetings. Try to sleep at least 4 hours tonight. Adrian stared at the notes, silently, while something inside him began breaking apart piece by piece. This was not an assistant doing her job. This was someone loving him quietly for years while asking for almost nothing in return. His breathing turned uneven. A knock interrupted the silence. Julian Mercer stepped carefully into the office, holding a folder beneath one arm. The second he saw Adrian's face, his expression shifted slightly. She resigned? Adrian's voice sounded rougher than usual. Julian nodded slowly. I know. Adrian looked up immediately. You knew? She called me this morning. The jealousy Adrian usually felt hearing Julian's name never came this time. Only fear. Where is she? Julian remained quiet for a moment before answering honestly. At the train station. Adrian stood instantly. Why? Because she accepted the wrong position. Silence crashed through the office. Adrian felt his heartbeat stumble painfully inside his chest. Julian watched him carefully now. The train leaves in less than an hour. For one frozen second, Adrian Cole simply stood there staring at the resignation letter still clutched tightly in his hand. Then suddenly he moved. Fast. Truly panicked for the first time in years. Because the terrifying truth had finally become impossible to deny. Claire Bennett was not just leaving the company. She was leaving him. Snow and freezing rain hammered against the streets of Manhattan as Adrian Cole pushed through the crowded entrance of Grand Central Terminal, breathing harder than he had in years. People rushed around him, dragging suitcases through puddles of melted snow while departure announcements echoed through the massive marble station overhead. Adrian barely noticed any of it. His entire world had narrowed down to one terrifying thought. Claire Bennett was leaving. And this time, she might never come back. Rome departures, he muttered under his breath, scanning the glowing boards above the crowd. His dress shoes splashed through icy water as he moved quickly past travelers wrapped in winter coats, and exhausted commuters clutching paper coffee cups. The billionaire CEO who controlled billion-dollar mergers and private jets suddenly looked like nothing more than a desperate man chasing the one person he should have fought for years ago. Adrian reached the boarding platform just as the announcement echoed overhead. Final boarding for the 12:40 train to Boston connecting to Rome departures. His chest tightened painfully. Then finally, through the crowded station, he saw her. Claire stood near the platform window with a gray wool coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, one hand resting on the handle of her suitcase while snow drifted softly beyond the glass behind her. She looked calm, tired, heartbroken, beautiful. And standing beside her was Julian Mercer. Adrian slowed slightly as he approached. Julian noticed him first. Their eyes met across the station. For one long moment either man spoke. Then Julian glanced toward Claire softly. I think someone is here for you. Claire turned slowly. The second she saw Adrian standing there soaked by snow and breathing unevenly in the middle of Grand Central Terminal, genuine shock crossed her face. Adrian? Adrian stepped closer carefully like he was afraid she might disappear if he moved too quickly. Do not get on that train. Claire stared at him silently. Around them, travelers rushed past while announcements echoed through the station, but somehow the world still felt strangely quiet between them. Julian looked between both of them and gently reached for Claire's suitcase handle. I will give you 2 a minute. Adrian watched him walk away without jealousy this time. Only gratitude. Then his eyes returned to Claire completely. You came all the way here? She asked softly. Adrian let out a shaky breath. I should have come sooner. Claire looked down briefly, emotions flickering across her face too quickly to hide. Adrian, no. His voice cracked slightly as he stepped closer. Please let me say this before I lose my nerve. That alone stunned her. Adrian Cole never lost his nerve. Never looked uncertain. Never looked afraid. But right now, standing beneath cold station lights with snow melting against his dark coat, he looked terrified. I spent years convincing myself that needing someone was weakness, he admitted quietly. And somewhere along the way, I turned you into part of the background of my life because I thought you would always stay. Claire swallowed hard but said nothing. Adrian's hand tightened around the resignation letter still folded in his coat pocket. Then the second you walked away, he exhaled shakily. Everything fell apart. Emotion flickered visibly through Claire's eyes now. Adrian looked at her like a man finally seeing clearly after years of blindness. The coffee tasted wrong without you. The office felt empty without you. I could not even look at my own schedule without realizing every part of my life was being quietly held together by someone I never thanked enough. Claire's eyes glistened slightly beneath the station lights. Adrian stepped even closer now. You were never replaceable, Claire. His voice lowered painfully. You were the most important person in my life, and I was too arrogant to admit it until I thought I lost you. Silence stretched between them while snow swirled outside the station windows. Claire looked down for a moment, fighting emotions she clearly did not trust anymore. You hurt me, she whispered finally. Adrian nodded immediately. I know. You made me feel invisible. His expression shattered slightly. I know. Claire lifted her eyes back toward him. And now suddenly you care because another man noticed me? Adrian closed his eyes briefly before answering honestly. No. He looked at her again, completely unguarded now. Another man just forced me to realize what I should have seen years ago. Claire's breathing trembled softly. Adrian reached carefully into his coat and pulled out one of her tiny yellow sticky notes. Try to sleep at least 4 hours tonight. Claire recognized her handwriting instantly. Adrian held it like something precious. Do you know how many of these you left behind? His voice lowered almost to a whisper. Nobody has ever cared about me the way you did. Tears finally filled Claire's eyes completely. The boarding announcement echoed again overhead. Final call. Adrian looked at her desperately now. Do not leave because I was too stupid to tell you that I love you. The words hung between them in the middle of Grand Central Terminal, while snow fell endlessly outside. And for the first time in 4 years, Adrian Cole stopped hiding how deeply Claire Bennett owned his heart. 6 months later, spring sunlight poured through the towering glass windows of Cole and Vale Capital, while New York bloomed back to life beneath a pale blue sky. The city no longer felt cold. Neither did the man standing alone near the executive stage inside the company's annual leadership summit. Adrian Cole adjusted the microphone in front of him while hundreds of employees filled the ballroom below, waiting for the Billionaire CEO's opening speech. Usually these events were polished performances about market growth and expansion forecasts. Today felt different. Adrian looked calmer now. Softer somehow. Not because business had become easier, but because for the first time in years, his life no longer felt empty behind the success. Near the back of the ballroom, Claire Bennett stood quietly beside Madison watching him with cautious eyes. She had not gone to Rome that winter. Not immediately. After Grand Central Terminal, she and Adrian spent weeks learning how to speak honestly to each other for the first time instead of hiding behind routines, power, and silence. It had not been easy. Trust never returned overnight. But Adrian had done something nobody expected from a man like him. He changed. Slowly. Consistently. Publicly. He stopped treating her care like something guaranteed. He started listening instead of commanding. And perhaps most importantly, he stopped loving her in secret while pretending indifference. Adrian glanced toward Claire now as employees settled into their seats. The moment his eyes found her, The tension in his shoulders eased almost instantly. Claire noticed. A small smile touched her lips before she quickly looked away. Madison leaned closer and whispered teasingly, "He still looks at you like you hung the moon." Claire laughed softly under her breath. "Madison, I am serious." Madison grinned. "The terrifying billionaire thing disappeared months ago." Adrian stepped fully toward the microphone then, and the ballroom gradually fell silent. "Good afternoon," he began smoothly. "Most leadership conferences start with numbers." Soft laughter moved through the room. "Revenue. Expansion. Performance metrics." Adrian paused briefly, eyes moving across the crowd before settling once more on Claire. "But today I want to talk about something else." Claire's smile faded slightly as she realized how serious his expression had become. Adrian rested one hand lightly against the podium. "For years, I believed success meant control. Efficiency. Never needing anyone." The room listened carefully now. "And because of that mindset, I made the worst mistake of my life." Claire's breath caught softly. Adrian continued quietly, honestly. "I spent years overlooking the person who was quietly holding everything together around me." Murmurs spread gently through the ballroom as employees exchanged curious looks. Adrian did not look away from Claire once. There was someone in this company who worked harder than anyone else. Someone who protected people without asking for recognition. Someone who remembered every detail about everyone else while being treated like she was invisible. Claire's eyes immediately filled with emotion. Madison reached for her hand supportively. Adrian's voice lowered slightly now. "And I convinced myself she would always stay no matter how little appreciation I showed her." The ballroom had gone completely silent. "I was wrong." Adrian stepped away from the podium then, ignoring confused executives nearby as he walked slowly through the ballroom toward the back of the room where Claire stood frozen in place. Every employee in the company watched him cross the floor. Adrian stopped directly in front of her. For one brief second, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled softly in that rare unguarded way only Claire ever truly saw. "Claire Bennett," he said gently, "you were never replaceable." Tears slipped quietly down Claire's cheeks as the entire ballroom watched in stunned silence. Adrian reached carefully into his pocket and pulled out an old yellow sticky note folded neatly in half. Claire recognized it instantly. "Try to sleep at least 4 hours tonight." Her own handwriting. Adrian held it carefully between his fingers like something priceless. "I carried this every day after you left." His voice trembled slightly now. "Because it reminded me what real love looks like." Claire covered her mouth softly as emotion overwhelmed her completely. Adrian looked at her with absolute certainty. "You once asked if I would have noticed you disappearing if another man had not walked into that ballroom." Claire nodded faintly through tears. Adrian stepped closer. "The truth is, I should have noticed long before that." His expression softened painfully. "But I promise for the rest of my life, you will never feel invisible again." The ballroom erupted into applause around them, but Adrian barely heard any of it. He only saw Claire smiling through tears before finally stepping into his arms. And as Manhattan sunlight flooded the room around them, Adrian Cole realized the most valuable thing he had ever built was not an empire, a company, or a fortune. It was finally becoming the kind of man worthy of the woman who had loved him all along.